Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever everybody is from. We're so glad to have you here for the second Behind the Screen series. So, for those of you who aren't familiar with who the brand we are Olsberg SPI, and we're an international creative industries consultancy that specializes in the global screen sector. And Beyond the Screen is our new webinar series. So, the objective of these has been to delve into discussions with industry experts, such as Steve, alongside with our own original analysis on emerging trends, data, and critical insights across the global screen sector. So, our first edition of the Behind the Screen series was co-hosted with Screen International by our very own Joe Sterling, and that focused on SPI's November edition of the Global Incentives Index, which is a guide to all automatic national, state, and province level production incentives. So for this one, we thought that we would explore how a film and television production can drive economic impact across a wide range of business sectors, not just within the screen sector itself, but also across the broader economy. So now that we've chatted about why you're all here, I should probably introduce myself. So my name's Emma Openshaw. I'm a senior research analyst at SPI. I'm originally from South Africa, hence the slightly twangy accent. And I started off in production as a producer and director in South Africa. So as a result of me earning my stripes on film and TV sets, I've gained the responsibility of leading these microeconomic impact analyses or ripple analyses that we're going to chat through today. But that's enough about me. So we'll go on to our esteemed guest here joining us, who has quite the impressive track record of box office hits and global smashes, including Netflix's Half Bad, BBC's Talking Heads, and the Sherlock Holmes films. So Steve Clark Hall could probably spend the duration of this webinar talking to us about his decades of on-the-ground experience. Steve has also long worked with SPI, refining this ripple analyses with our founder, Jonathan. And I'm going to let him do a bit of a high, quick, and fill any of the apps I missed.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a producer, a production executive, I guess, and a consultant. And right now I'm doing something. It's an 8-part television show which I can't talk about because I've signed an NDA. But it should be out in about 18 months' time. That's how long it takes for me to make a TV show. So I apologize.
As is always the way. I mean, you've got to keep some things up your sleeve, but good to know that it takes that long to make a TV show because we'll definitely come back to that when we start talking about ripple impacts throughout TV shows. All right, so Steve, shall we just jump right into it? Also, before we actually jump right into it, some housekeeping rules. Everyone, please feel free to pop through notes in the chat. Our lovely Anna Clark, who has coordinated this webinar, is standing by to take any questions and comments, and we'll do a Q&A at the end. So make sure to keep all of those coming through, and we'll touch on those. Hopefully, we'll have enough time, which I'm sure we will. But yeah, okay, let's jump into it. So Steve, let's chat a bit more about actually understanding why a production would spend money on a location. So how exactly do film and TV shows go about using services in business sectors outside of the screen sector?
Yeah, well, I guess the first thing to say is that no two shows are the same. Every TV or movie that I've ever made has been a one-off. That said, there are certain rules that you can apply. First of all, to think about the what we call the above the line and below the line. Above the line being what you use to sell the project. It's the actor, the cast, the script, etc., etc. And essentially, the higher the budget, the higher the proportion of the budget that's spent above the line. It's slightly odd. If you're doing a very low budget production, your percentage above the line has to be very low. And the more you start employing high-end cast, high-end directors, high-end script writers, the above the line goes up. That said, of course, when you're dealing with the sort of the size of the budget, there are some basic things just thinking about below the line that you need to look for. If you have a sort of production where a lot of it's local. That is, you're shooting out of a local studio or you're shooting out of a local base with local locations, then a proportion of your your costs will be lower. They're like hotel and living, catering, etc., etc. The moment you take the unit on location, then you start to spend money in those locations on things like hotels and transport and local people, etc., etc. So different shows have different kind of footprints, and that shows up quite a lot in the ripples. You look at something, you say, why is hotel and living so low there? That's because it was all shot at, I don't know, Shepperton Studios and just done locally using local crew, etc. So each show has its own different kind of footprint. But in terms of the benefit of shows going into areas, there are lots of examples of big shows which start small, become big, and actually have a significant impact. I mean, I can think of something
Yeah.
like Outlander, for example, went as a fairly small show to Cumbernauld, is now basically has set up a whole industry around Cumbernauld. There are studios there that didn't exist, etc., etc. Peaky Blinders had a major impact in the area that it was shot, etc., etc.
And I think you bring that up and it's quite interesting in terms of that development of space and the impact of geographies when we're talking about those impacts. And what is interesting and what I've noticed while we've been doing these ripples is you the value of a production can shift, but it can also really be impacted by what the existing infrastructure is there at the time. And that's not just screen specific infrastructure. So, especially like you've mentioned, studios obviously have a huge impact, and studios are, of course, we consider them as a screen specific kind of area, but you'll have construction that goes into that, into building sets, and often a lot of those resources and a lot of those impacts into that construction will come from businesses that don't only service the film and TV industry. And a lot of people don't think about those, all the pieces that make up the whole. And I think that is a big part of what these ripple impacts do, ripple analyses really do reveal about impact, is that it really is quite holistic and can be very layered.
Yes, I mean, for example, the impact of a period show going into a place can have quite a significant impact on the fashion and beauty section area of that place where it goes.
I'm just imagining the cost of Downton Abbey now and the amount of lace that must have gone into that, to be honest.
I imagine quite a few yards.
Yeah. Okay, well,
What about the
since we've
Queen? What about the Crown? You know,
oh yeah. Actually, the crown, especially, I mean, that whole region must have just taken off in terms of layers of lace and different
and so,
accessories.
but it's also true to say that the period that a film or TV show is set in can have a big impact on its the resources that it uses out of an area. So,
Yeah.
in a single rule, every show is different, and each show can bring significant advantage to the area that it's being shot in.
Definitely. And I think on that note, we can kind of jump a bit more into the ripple processes themselves, because that might highlight exactly what we're talking about in terms of these business sectors and where those impacts can be seen, as Steve's mentioned, wardrobe and fashion. I was talking a bit more about construction. So Steve, can you tell us a bit more about how ripples work exactly in terms of, what is a ripple impact
Yes.
analysis? And then we can chat a bit more about where we've seen them be impactful and how they've been used.
Right. Well, so basically, we want to do an analysis of a production of a TV show or a movie, and we get as much information in as we possibly can. We are then asked sorry, what is the information that they want to get from the ripple? And sometimes it's what's the spend in a particular area or something like that. So then what I get, or what we get, is as much data as we possibly can from the production team. It usually comes in one of two forms, and in an absolutely ideal world, if I'm really able to persuade them, in both. And the two forms are all the accounts of everything that's been spent in the area from the account system, and ideally also a budget, because the budget gives me much more granular information about what is spent in which area. But once I get all that information, and it can be a pretty massive spreadsheet, to be honest, of all the lines in of
Yeah.
expenditure. So each PA, they've got their own line, and each item of costume has its own line. So this massive set of data will come in. And then what we do is we have a number of categories which we break it out into. And they are what's called screen specific. And that is something that is very dedicated to the film or TV industry. Think of a camera team, for example.
Yeah.
That's what they are. They're screen specific. They can't go off and
Yeah.
build a.
Or an equipment rental house, that kind of thing. That's
Yeah,
very much catering to the industry.
but very much the although there are some rental things which aren't specific to
Hmm.
the industry. For example,
Yeah.
there is some of the construction, for example, towers and things like that,
Or cars. Yeah, that kind of thing.
and transport, of course, yes.
Hmm.
Then so that's one area is to pull out of all that data the line that is specific to the screen, and then within that category in the accounts, there will be things which I look at and I say, well, actually, that isn't really screen specific. That could be utilities, or it could be training. There are other areas. So then the other area which we look at is training and education. It's not always easy to pull that out of the data, to be honest.
Yeah.
And some people don't do it at all. So
Yeah.
um, I just can't find any reference to it at all on
Yeah.
some shows.
I've definitely become quite judgmental in terms of my budgets ever since I've started doing ripples with you. I think it has formed my idea of having a nice, neat, and clean budget for sure.
Yes, and so you've got to be careful you're not that you're behaving properly, which is always one of the things I try very hard to do and fail usually. Then we have digital services, which are very specifically the digital part. A lot of it could be screen specific, but I pull it out into digital because it is a very specific, quite a small area, but very specific area. And then power and utilities, that's electricity and stuff like that. Business support, that's a sort of a bit of a bucket that I put in photocopiers, for example, and
Yeah.
just the sort of general stuff.
A lot of production office type things like
Yes, it's
printing
not
and
the
that kind
production
of
office
thing.
itself, but it's the
Yeah.
the sort of backup.
Hmm.
And then a bigger category always is real estate and locations.
Yeah.
So this will be your rental of the production offices in the local area. It
Hmm.
will be your rental of the studio in the local area if there is a studio. And quite often there isn't actually a traditional studio, but there's a warehouse or something into which we call it a fit up. You build sets in the warehouse, but things like that, production offices and things like that, which are local money spent in the local area. Then I've got fashion and beauty. Now, it's an interesting area. How here I have to make a value judgment actually about a
Yeah.
particular line. Is this screen specific, or can this be put in the fashion and beauty area? So most of the crew will be screen specific, but I will
Yeah.
usually say there are one or two members of that crew who actually are local and they come from the local fashion industry, or indeed moving on to another area, um, which is further down, theatrical.
Music performance and theatrical.
Music, thank you. No, I was
Yeah.
looking for it. Yeah, music, performing arts, right?
Yeah.
So that I've got to make a value judgment sometimes on some of those lines as to where I will put them, and I quite often will take them out of screen specific because they
Hmm.
are, although they are very usually screen, nevertheless they are definitely fashion, and the local
Yeah.
areas will benefit from having people go in, rent costumes, and buy materials, etc., etc.
Yeah, and I think we'll see that a lot through the examples. It might be helpful to kind of bring those up in a bit. I think what is important just to say about this as well in terms of the process from our side, when we do this, we normally do it for as part of an economic impact analysis as a wider activity to evaluate the impact of an industry. And what we'll do this ripple impact analysis for is to look at those wider effects of a production. And it is really useful, you'll see shortly, that it comes together in a visual that is often communicated to government entities or national bodies or the wider industry who aren't as familiar with how these productions work and what the actual tangible impacts are. I think a lot of the preconceptions that we get are that productions will come in, they'll spend the money, they'll either bring in a lot of people and a lot of things, and they'll mainly spend the money in terms of the vendors that service the industry, and then they'll leave. And I think what the ripples do is to what you're talking about is they'll really activate in different parts of the economy that you don't think of until you've been inside of it and understand that within a production office that you're probably renting or you've assembled in a warehouse, you'll have these 25 other things, including purchasing stationery, buying computers, renting computers, getting office furniture. And that sounds all really basic, but that is all stuff that comes from your local stationery store or your warehouse or a supplier like that. And I think in terms of fashion and beauty, that's a really interesting one because you'll have a lot of makeup artists who don't just work for the film and TV industry. They'll be working across weddings, or they'll be working in theatre, or they'll even be working in a shop, and they'll come in and out. And those are the kind of impacts that really do translate to especially government entities who are supporting funds or incentives as to how the industry can tangibly impact an economy outside of just its boundaries, which is really rare and unique for an industry to do that. So yeah, I just wanted to jump in and give that. And also, Steve, I think you and I both know we work very intricately with these budgets, but they're always confidential. So we get all the information, and then what we do is we take the information, we analyze it like Steve is saying, painstakingly through each line item, and then we put it into the visual because it's completely confidential. So there's no association with the production, what production was involved in what ripple. So you're not going to get any sneak previews of budgets for productions to later ruin down. You'll have to ask Steve for that later. But it is very helpful because what we do is we kind of bracket productions in terms of their budget range and in terms of their format, which is something while all film and TV productions are different, there are some trends and similarities across different formats and different budgets, which to carry on from what you're talking about, Steve, we can jump into the example of one of the budgets I think it was one of the first ripples I ever worked on for the Creative England project. So this was a project we did in 2023, and this ripple, along with nine other ripples I think we did, informed the creation of the local economic toolkit, which Creative England offers to all of its very multiple counties and stakeholders to basically evaluate their own economic impact. So, Steve, let's run through this feature film low budget and kind of pull out the bits and pieces that you were talking about so that people can see exactly what this graph is really talking about.
Yes. So what's very clear, if you do the lower the budget, the more is spent on the screen specific. That's just because that's how you keep the budget low, frankly. And but and this example is one of those. A low budget production can have a very significant impact on a local area. So I'm not talking about a film a film that's made, say, in London. That doesn't really apply. But if it's one that's made out of London, it can have a major impact, not only on money spent in that area, but crucially on the careers of local people. And this screen specific was a group of people in a local area making this film that actually was extremely well received and well thought of and has turbo boost their careers.
Yeah.
And they will
And
be go on living in their area. So that is, for me, one of the things we've really got to keep a handle on in terms of spreading the word. Just on my personal life,
please do.
I started in a far off land called Scotland, and was there for 10 years. And in that 10 years, the Scottish film industry grew from virtually nothing into a significant part of the British film industry overall.
Yeah.
And it still has a real impact. And that was because some of the very low budget stuff that was done back in the 70s, sorry, think of Local Hero, for example.
Yeah.
And I won't mention any projects that I did, but I think that they did have this local impact. And so it's one of my passions actually, is to help people set up the lower budget work that will turbo boost their careers.
Yeah.
I think that was a
I,
diversion. Sorry, I shall stop.
no, please don't stop at all. I think it's really handy to have those parallels, especially in terms of like Scotland and how we've seen the development of the industry there. I think what is interesting in this one, from what you were saying, is you have those larger portions to things like finance and legal company costs and business support, which they're slightly higher percentages in terms of that other business spend, which is interesting because as you were talking about, this was film. We divided the Creative England ripples into their different areas. So we had ones that were in a production hub, so outside of London, that were close enough to London, ones that were in a regional production hub, and ones that were remote. And this film was remote. So it's interesting to have those business sectors impacted because those are things like you assume accounting, different legal entities putting together, your business support for your production support. So I found that really interesting with this one because you can imagine those smaller areas really benefiting from a production being there in sectors that you wouldn't normally associate.
Yeah, and of course, as a filmmaker, I look at that and I say, yeah, the lawyers did all right out of it.
Yeah, that too.
But that too.
Yeah.
But it's also true that the other areas that benefit from the arrival of a film unit, obviously, are hospitals, hospitality, not hospitals, so hospitality, catering. That
Yeah.
the arrival of a film crew, frankly, dumps money into that area very effectively.
Yeah,
Um,
and I think while you're talking about that, we can jump over to our next feature film example, which is from our Georgia project. So this was a feature film, a high budget in Georgia, and that really has those reflections in terms of your hospitality and catering, travel, which I always find quite interesting because you'll have while you have people bringing in talent, so that above the line that we don't really look at, but if you have these high budgets, you'll have talent coming in, which is normally viewed as a bit of a negative, and it's difficult as a filmmaker to wrap your head around that narrative to convince regions that it's beneficial to have your production there, even though you're bringing in talent. And honestly, the impact to hospitality and catering, travel and transport, the rental of locations and real estate, that's really done through these high budgets that are bringing in that then need to house and put people in places and rent places. And that's really where you see that impact of those high budgets.
and the other thing, when a production lands in an area, the
Mhm.
one thing it will do is employ quite a lot of local labor, which
Right.
local. This can be, drivers, although they'll go into the transport category. It can be people who are just sort of helping with the show, but they are not. The other thing, which tends to go, I'm just checking here to see, in the music and performing arts area, for example,
Hmm.
local actors, of course, will get used, but a lot of local people will get used as extras.
Yeah.
And again, that may be a beginning of a career for people. I've known a lot of people who started off first time they went on a film set was extras, and then who might end up as stunt people later. So
Yeah.
it has this effect. Interestingly, looking at this, and I was trying to find it, and then eventually I did. I can't see it immediately. There's no lawyers involved. So the
Oh,
reason the reason for
ah,
that will be because the lawyers didn't go to the local area; they were back, operating out of capital city or whatever.
And that goes to your point of every production is completely different. And I think I mean, this was one of the highest kind of music and performing arts percentages I think we've had. And that was really interesting because it was shot in Georgia. Georgia has a really rich cultural background. So when we're doing this analysis, we take those elements into consideration, especially when we're doing projects for those specific regions. The fact that there is a really rich music, theatrical, and obviously existing film and TV industry, that's going to impact how that economy that is servicing the wider creative industries and just wider business sectors, how that reflects in these ripples. So I'm keeping an eye on time, Steve. We do have one last ripple, which we should have a look at. So
Yep.
we've looked at two feature films. This is a TV budget. And the while budgets kind of differ in terms of how they behave with these ripple impacts, formats actually do have quite a significant impact as well in terms of how they vary with their behavior. So, can you tell us a little bit more about why this footprint is a bit different?
Well, interestingly, the screen specific area is very similar,
Mhm.
32% and 30%. The power and utilities, again, very similar as a percentage of the spend. Um, Business support, again, similar. Location fees are more for television as a general rule, and that can be studios and so real estate. Um, Tend to be a bit more. Um, TV shows usually they try to shoot in a studio because they can go back to that a lot. So that is it's always a significant cost. Fashion and beauty, a little bit less here than in the movie, but hospitality, considerably more. The crews
Mhm.
tend to be, because if you're doing a TV show, let's say eight parts, the crews will change. So
Mhm.
you'll have a block one, and then a second block will go in, and the second block will do some prep to as well as the shoot. So you'll be doubling up on your hotels for a number of people. So that's one of the reasons that when you're doing um, a TV show, let's say a 6 or 8 parter, if it's done on
Yeah.
the traditional way, that hospitality and catering can be a really significant proportion of the spend.
Yeah.
Um, Construction will be very dependent, and the same that impact also goes into the travel and transport area because
Yeah.
there's more movement in and out as you go from block one to block two to block three.
Yeah, and I think we did one on a unscripted production that I think was quite interesting because it was like a lot of unscripted or reality documentary type productions. There'll be multiple seasons or they'll run over multiple different occasions. So they'll start establishing this presence in those regions that they're visiting. And I think what's quite interesting there is you see this training and education percentage increase slightly because you'll have that training and education through local communities, and it will not only be just bringing in people to the industry itself, but training and education around, the necessities of a production. So whether it requires inputs for, marine filming, that's boating, that's a lot of other additional skills that need to be upskilled that a production will facilitate because they're going to keep coming back. So you have a lot of those reality shows and those repeat shows that will come back. And I think that repeat factor is also really interesting with television because you have this potential for multiple ripples ongoing over time.
Yes, and I just to go back and talk to the training. The other thing about TV is that the shoots are very much longer. So
Hmm.
a 21, 25 week shoot is the norm essentially if you're doing a 6 to 8 part series. So the opportunities for training
Hmm.
are much greater because you can
Yeah.
have work experience and you can have that sort of business. And I think it's something that we are encouraging more and more. Um,
Yeah.
and I would advocate encouraging it more and more. And TV is probably a slightly more friendly environment to have that taking place than a one-off feature film which will come in and go out.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Steve, I think you and I could talk about this for a while. But before we get on to questions, I want to just ask I mean, you've mentioned some interesting things and obviously things that you're very passionate about when it comes to talking about the value of production. But Are there any surprising takeaways that you found over doing these ripples that you as a producer didn't expect to be basically generated from TV and film productions taking place in different regions?
I think that the I think that what it emphasized to me was the that of particularly actually television, the impact it can have on a local area.
Hmm.
And I've filmed all over the world essentially. And one of the things that happens when a production goes into, I don't know, for example, South Africa for 5 weeks or India for 5 weeks, is the things that I've always found most sort of rewarding in a way is to work with different cultures and to try
Yeah.
and figure out ways of the British or American crews going into a different area and a different cultural environment and actually not going in and behaving like colonialists.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and so in and if you can get the right culture and the right sort of approach, you can
Yeah.
get really good rewards as individual filmmakers by collaborating with people in different areas, and that to me has been one of the great satisfactions of the job I do.
Well, I love that. I think it adds to the richness of the production by viewing it in that way of how much you can benefit from actually investing in the space that you're filming in. So we do have a couple of questions, so let's jump into them. If we don't get to any of your questions, we will definitely reply to them over mail, and we'll make sure to get Steve involved in that. But I'll pull a couple through. So, Steve, we have a question from Eloise who was wondering if there is a list of more detailed non-screen specific line items. So breaking down exactly how those business sectors are defined, or how do we basically break that down?
Yeah. Well, at the moment, you're having to rely on my my instinct, I think, because it's quite. But Eloise is quite right. It's quite a broad kind of area,
Yeah.
um, and what we have to do is we go through this huge list of items and then try and sort of put them into different categories. And I'm not sure I can tell you exactly how it's done. I think it's a matter of judgment and experience. If I look at, for example, if I'm looking at a local, I'm just looking at the question, non-specifics items. So, for example, within makeup and wardrobe,
Yeah.
how I would decide how much would go into this screen specific and how much would go into the fashion and beauty and how much it might go into theatre will depend on three things. One is I'm my experience, if you like, of doing it, and that may be useful or may not be, the script and a knowledge of the show, and also knowledge of of what the area is. I mean, if I can give you one sort of notional example, if you're filming around Chichester, where there is a very, very vigorous and active theatre, you might be accessing theatrical more than you would if you were in, I don't know, the Brecon Beacons or somewhere. So there is a judgment that will be made on a number of areas of the budget,
Mhm.
which can be challenged, of course, but it's somebody has to make that judgment, and
Yeah.
it's me at the moment.
And I think it's a fair point. It's how we go through the detailed budget, and we really do go at line item by line item. Just while we're going to wrap up, we're going to do one more question, which I'll feed into first, and then Steve, feel free to jump in. So we had a question regarding how AI and virtual production influences ripple effects. So it's very new. At Allsberg, we do quite a bit of work in terms of trends and insights in terms of AI and virtual production and advanced technologies. We work with CoStar, the CoStar Foresight Lab, and it's not coming through in budgets yet that we're doing, which I find quite interesting. But if we were to approach it, and Steve, I'm sure you can jump in on this as well, virtual production would be a mix between screen specific and digital because I think you have a lot of impacts in terms of virtual production that are tech. So if someone was using an Unreal Engine, that's not screen specific, but it's because it's used across very different content. But there are elements of virtual production that are screen specific. So I think it's a very interesting question, and we will probably have to have a conversation in terms of how we adjust those business sectors to maybe look at the encompassing of tech and advanced technologies. Steve, I don't know if you have any last minute
Yeah,
thoughts on adding
the
that in.
two bits of the question. AI was the first bit, and virtual
Yes.
production is the second bit. AI, no, not in doing ripples. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Comes out of here. In production, it's beginning to come in.
Yeah.
I use it a lot on doing my initial schedules, for example.
Hmm.
It saves me like 3 weeks on doing a schedule. Um, but not in doing the ripples. That has to be, to me, a matter of judgment. If you look at virtual production, VP stage, etc., that if I if all I've got is the accounts, it's quite difficult for me to know whether a particular thing is a VP scene or it's a VP this or a VP that. Quite difficult. If I know more about the production, I am able to get much more specific. So, for example, if I have a car driving through the streets of London and I happen to know that it was done on a VP stage, even though it looks like it's driving through the streets of London, I would put that into split it between. I
Yeah.
put half of it into digital and half of it into screen specific because I know that half, and then I put a little bit into transport or something or props.
Yeah.
But yes, absolutely. If we can get enough information, we can start to get much more granular about it. Often we don't get as much information as we would like to have, and that makes it a little bit trickier. But VP
Yeah.
stage, a mixture between screen specific and digital, in my opinion.
Right. Well, thank you for that, Steve, and thank you for sticking with us. I'm aware that we've gone a little bit over, but we had to include, the AI virtual production question. It's the question of our time. But if, as I said, if there are any more questions, please do send them through. I believe you will get the email address contact@OSVI. Through on the follow-up email to this webinar. Also, our Ripple handbook will be coming out within the coming weeks. So that will follow onto this and give you a lot more detail. If you would like to either utilize ripples as an example to show the value of production, or if you would like to get your own, you can always reach out to us. So, Steve, thank you again for joining, and thank you all for staying on with us on this lovely afternoon chatting about productions. It's been great. Thanks,
Thank you.
Steve. Great.
Cheers. Bye bye.
Bye, everyone.